What's going on, guys? AFK Tech here, and today we're going to be doing the first official build on my channel. So what is this build for? One of my family members reached out to me and asked if I could build him a computer. He'd originally been using a Dell Inspiron 15 laptop that's probably about 5 or 6 years old. I think it originally came with Windows Vista on it even. It has some loose hinges, and obviously he is due for an upgrade. So I set out to figure out what parts I wanted to use for this build specifically. I've been kind of out of the loop lately because I haven't had really any reason to be looking at consumer parts because my 4770K has been trucking along just fine. When I got in and started to actually do some research, it looked like I wanted to go with an Intel i5. I didn't want to go i3 because I do think quad-core has a lot of value in long-term usability and overall life in a computer that you build. So I ended up ultimately deciding on an i5 7500. The reason I didn't go unlocked is because he's not going to be running any games, and this was probably about $30 cheaper when I found it on sale at Fry's recently. The next component we're going to go over is the SSD. I think this is the most tangible upgrade people can make to their computers today if you are already running a hard drive. This is something that if someone's complaining about their computer running slow and they have, beefy enough processor for what they need to do, this is probably what you can do to really speed things up and give that tangible benefit to spending actually, money on a computer. Next up is 8 gigs of RAM. He doesn't need a ton of RAM. He's not going to be doing any video editing. I think 8 gigs is still kind of the sweet spot. 16 gigs is slowly moving to, where the norm for most builds. But for him, 8 gigs was fine. I got G-Scale's Ripjaw. Love these guys. That's what I've used in a majority of my custom builds. For the motherboard, this was kind of the trickier part for me to select. There's so many motherboards out there now. I swear there's more and more every generation that manufacturers put out. I remember back in the day, probably like 6-7 years ago, when a new platform came out, they had like 5 or 6 per manufacturer, but there wasn't this huge, massive 210 I think on Newegg when I looked selection. So I decided to go with the ASRock Z270. I built an ITX board back in the Z87 days with them. I liked it. There wasn't any big problems, and it does fit a really good price point. So I got this for $120, I think. It's the Killer SLI AC. So the AC denotes that it did come. It has a built-in AC Wi-Fi card. It's got Intel NIC, Realtek audio, all your standard stuff you're seeing now with the Z270 chipset. Dual M2. He's not going to be using that, but it was a nice feature for the price. And overall, I really think this board's going to work out well, and I hope that it is perfect for him. In terms of cooling for the processor, I went with the Hyper 212 Evo. It's tried and true. This one's used in so many different builds. It's really a great value. 30 bucks, you're going to be competing with some of the higher end coolers. Obviously this one isn't going to be overclocked, so it's not a huge deal, but I want to make sure the processor lasts a while by keeping it cool, and I don't want the unpredictability of a Intel stock heatsink just popping off like I've seen it do in the past. For the power supply, we got a CX430 from Corsair. I don't know if this is probably my most, disappointing or lowest part that I have for this build. It's only 80 plus certified. It's no silver or gold or bronze. So I wish I maybe could have found a better deal on maybe a little bit higher quality power supply, but I think this will work out fine for them. They're really great on replacing these. I've had some Corsair power supplies fail in the past, and they're pretty quick and easy on getting these replaced. For mouse and keyboard, went with a pretty simple Logitech combo. There wasn't any reason to spend a lot of money. He definitely doesn't care about Cherry MX or getting a mechanical keyboard or the latest Logitech gaming mouse for his high performance FPS play, because he's not going to be doing any of that. For the case, I think this is probably my favorite part that we're looking at today, besides the processor, since I haven't built with this platform yet, is the Define R5. So I have the R4 currently as my main rig, but getting my hands on the R5 has been really cool because it does offer a lot of cool upgrades from the R4. I might even do a little bit more of an in-depth review on this. I'm not sure yet, but I ended up getting the titanium, which I thought might be a little cheesy originally. This front end maybe being kind of cheesily titanium looking, but it's actually super slick. I'm really impressed with it, and overall this case is really sweet. It's kind of making me tempted to upgrade my R4 to the R5 soon. So we'll see. Maybe I'll do that here in the coming months. Overall, I'm just going to pretty much jump into this, build this bad boy, get it together, kind of talk about some of the things I do when I'm building, and then kind of give you guys some performance numbers, wattage from the wall, and just an overall overview of the build. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is get the motherboard out, bust this bad boy open, and get things rolling. I'm going to make sure everything posts first, because obviously you never want to install everything into the system itself and then find out that you have a faulty component and then play the game of troubleshooting while all the stuff's in the system. So we're going to go ahead and use this box as a little test bench. Go ahead and pull the board out. The boxes actually work out really well as test benches because they are cardboard and therefore they're not conductive. So we'll go ahead and get the box here. So then let's go ahead and get the power supply. So next thing we're going to do is grab the RAM and the processor. We're just going to use the stock Intel heatsink to actually test this out. You don't want to take the time to mount your Hyper 212 or whatever heatsink you're going to be using, because obviously that's just a waste of time as well if you find out that you have, DOA motherboard or a bad processor. And we're going to go ahead and just jump the two headers that will be containing the switch. We'll go ahead and power this on. So we see some red pulsing here, so I guess that's the RGB, obviously stating that we kicked on. So we're going to go ahead and check the post now. I just grabbed an HDMI monitor. Go ahead and plug it in and see if this bad boy posts on. So in order to actually power this on without the case power switch, you're going to go down here and see where the power button is and which actual headers you need to touch in order for it to get jumped. So we see the power button here is these top two right ones. So we're just going to touch the two together. We're going to watch the computer spin up. So we just heard the heatsink turn on, and then make sure your monitor is powered on and just wait to see if you can get a post and figure out if everything has been recognized. So also make sure you have a keyboard handy after you actually get it to post. That way you can jump in the BIOS and make sure everything's been recognized. So we're going to go ahead and hit F2 to go into the setup. So we're in the BIOS. So we see two 4 gig sticks of RAM. We have an iFi 7500 at 3.4 gigahertz, and everything looks good to go. So at this point, we know that all of our main components are actually good. So we don't need to worry about putting this into the case and actually getting started. So we know all this stuff's working. So let's go ahead and disassemble this and move it into the Define R5. So we're going to go ahead and clean off that nasty Intel stuff that we left there from running the post test. Just use paper towel and isopropyl alcohol. So the Hyper 212 Evo is pretty straightforward to put on. Go ahead and zoom back out. This is pretty straightforward to put on. I'm just going to kind of skip through it. If you guys want to see a more detailed video on that, let me know. I have so many laying around. I could just reapply the thermal paste on one of the computers that has one and show you guys what's going on with that.
So we're just going to go ahead and speed through most of this. There's not really a ton to explain here. I was just putting heatsink on and then getting everything into the R5 itself. At the end, during some of the cable management and some of the final hookups, my camera battery died, so I don't have footage from that because I didn't really realize it died until after the fact. But just stay tuned and watch the quick speed through. So here you can see I got the cable management done and everything hooked up. I didn't do a super tidy job. It was kind of just a quick you know, speed through, just get things hooked up, because this isn't going to be some sort of show build, as well as it wasn't a modular power supply, so I could only be so neat in managing the cables. The power supply worked out pretty well though. It is a little bunched up there, but it was an pretty easy hookup for what it was. It turned out to look really great actually. I was really impressed with the kind of the aesthetic that the ASRock board gave this case, especially with the white accents already coming with a lot of the fractal cases. And everything was pretty straightforward to hook up. It's definitely a great value for the motherboard. The pricing for it is awesome. Outside of that, I was really impressed with the build. I'll offer some final thoughts at the end, but this is just a couple B-roll pans of the case itself with the stuff in there. It looks pretty empty without having a graphics card. The RGB on the south bridge is pretty cool. It's not super bright though, so it's not like something that's going to replace, you know, some sort of complementary RGB setup itself. I was pretty impressed at the end with the titanium R5. As I said at the beginning, I was afraid it was going to be a little gimmicky, but it looks really super sleek. Overall, I was pretty impressed with building in this. It was pretty straightforward, but shooting a build video is not exactly the easiest thing. It's hard to get a lot of the good angles, so that's definitely something I want to improve on in my next video. As for the power consumption, it was right around 45 watts, I think, if I remember correctly, so it's, you know, super low for a desktop, although it doesn't have a graphics card in it. So that's pretty much all I got for you guys with this. Be sure to subscribe if you liked the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a downvote. Let me know down in the description why not. And be sure to use my Amazon link because that helps me out a ton, guys. Thanks.